As I handed over the keys to the house, a cold, familiar voice cut through the air. "This house will belong to my parents now. If you resist, I'll divorce you." The words echoed, hanging in the room like a dark cloud. Daniel's smile didn't waver, even as he spoke to me, a woman shattered by the recent loss of her mother. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The love I once felt for him had dissolved into nothingness, replaced by a deep, simmering anger. Anger not just at him, but at the entire family who had taken advantage of my grief. "Fine, but you'll regret it." "Shut up. Fools should keep quiet," Daniel scoffed, his dismissive tone laced with arrogance. He tossed the completed divorce papers at me as if it were some trivial matter. But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe I would ever go through with it. He didn't think I had the strength. That was his mistake. Smiling slightly, I took the papers and left the house without another word. My destination was clear. I needed to speak to someone who could help me turn the tables. The next morning, my uncle and I arrived at the lavish house that Daniel's parents occupied. As we entered, Daniel's mother glared at me. "Where were you yesterday?" "A maid can't just disappear like that." "Maid? Who are you talking about?" I replied coldly. "Who else but you?" She sneered, clearly unaware of what was coming. "Actually, we're already divorced," I said, watching Daniel's expression freeze in shock. He looked at me, confused, as if the world had just shifted under his feet. Before he could respond, my uncle spoke up, his voice steady and authoritative. "We have some legal matters to discuss. My name is Gina Parker. I'm 35 years old, and until recently, I was a part-time housewife. My father died in a tragic accident when I was young, leaving my mother to raise me alone. She was an extraordinary woman, a self-made entrepreneur who built a successful company from the ground up. She often told me, 'Gina, I want you to be strong, both in life and in business. You should never rely on anyone else.' Those words guided me as I grew up, and they continue to resonate with me today. Growing up, my mother's hard work meant that we never had to worry about money. However, she also instilled in me the importance of earning what I wanted through my own efforts. "Mom, I want to get a part-time job. There's a course I want to take in the future," I told her one day. "Of course, Gina. You're always so determined," she replied with a proud smile. Her encouragement led me to work hard in everything I did. I eventually took on a significant role in her company, and that's where I met Daniel. He was charming, persistent, and seemed genuinely interested in me. Over time, I was drawn to his passionate nature, and we eventually got married. We didn't have children, though we had tried. Despite our struggles with infertility, I thought we were happy, or at least content. One evening, I returned home late after a particularly long day at work. Exhausted, I walked into the living room to find Daniel lounging on the sofa, his eyes glued to his phone. He didn't even glance up when I entered. "I messaged you that I'd be late, so you should have eaten already," I said, trying to keep my irritation in check. "Oh, did you?" he replied nonchalantly, not bothering to look at me. "Well, hurry up and make dinner. I'm hungry." I stared at him in disbelief. His attitude had changed so much since our early days together. Back then, he would help out with the housework, but now, he acted as if it were beneath him. "I just got home from a long day at work. You could have at least made yourself something," I said, my frustration bubbling over. "Stop nagging. You're just a failure because we don't have kids," he snapped back. His words cut deep. It wasn't just my fault that we couldn't conceive. It was something we both struggled with. But Daniel didn't see it that way. His pride was hurt, and he took it out on me. Our argument escalated, and he stormed off to bed, leaving his dinner untouched. I couldn't understand his behavior. After everything I had done for us, for him, how could he treat me this way? The next morning, Daniel was gone. It wasn't like him to leave the house early, so I assumed he had gone to his parents' place. I tried to shake off the unease and headed to the hospital to visit my mother. She had collapsed at work a few weeks earlier and had been hospitalized since then. Despite her illness, she continued to work from her hospital bed just as determined as ever. "How are you feeling, Mom?" I asked, forcing a smile. "As usual, dear," she replied, her voice soft but steady. We talked about trivial things, about the beautiful maple trees near the office, about work. I didn't want to burden her with my problems, especially not with what was going on with Daniel. But after our conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in my chest. When I returned home later that day, I found a message from Daniel's mother. Reluctantly, I called her back, only to be met with a barrage of accusations. "How dare you prioritize your mother over your husband? You should be ashamed." Her words were harsh, and I knew they were fueled by Daniel's complaints. He had run to his parents as usual, seeking their comfort instead of facing our problems head-on. As I ended the call, my uncle arrived at the house. He had come to check on my mother, but one look at my face and he knew something was wrong. "What's going on, Gina?" he asked gently. I explained the situation, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. My uncle listened patiently, his expression growing darker with each word I spoke. "Let's keep this from your mother," he said finally. "She doesn't need more stress right now." I nodded in agreement, grateful for his support. But the tension between Daniel and me only worsened over the next few days. Then suddenly, everything changed. My mother passed away. It happened so quickly that I was left in shock, unable to process the loss. My uncle took charge of the funeral arrangements, guiding me through those dark days. But as I stood at the funeral, numb with grief, I overheard Daniel and his parents laughing, actually laughing. "Now that the old lady's gone, the inheritance is ours," Daniel's father whispered, barely containing his excitement. Their callousness snapped me out of my grief. How could they be so cruel? My uncle noticed my distress and immediately had them removed from the funeral. "Gina, if you ever want to cut ties with them, just say the word," he told me, his voice filled with quiet fury. "Thank you," I whispered, still in shock at what I had witnessed. After the funeral, I couldn't bring myself to return to the house I shared with Daniel. Instead, I moved into my mother's mansion. It was filled with memories of happier times, weekends spent together, planting flowers in the garden, playing hide and seek in the vast rooms. My mother had loved this house, and now it was my refuge. A few days later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, expecting to see my uncle, but instead, Daniel and his parents barged in, carrying moving boxes. "What are you doing?" I demanded, blocking their path. "This is our house now," Daniel said smugly. "Your mother's gone, so this place belongs to us." "No, it doesn't," I replied, shocked by his audacity. "It's in my parents' name now," he continued, his grin widening. "A lawyer friend of ours helped us change the ownership." I stared at him, feeling the ground shift beneath me. How could he have done this without my permission? "You can work here as a maid if you like," Daniel sneered, throwing one final insult my way. That was the final straw. "Fine," I said, my voice icy. "But you'll regret it." Daniel just laughed, handing me the divorce papers. He thought he had won, that I was powerless against him. But he was wrong. I took the papers, signed them, and left the house without another word. I went straight to my uncle's office. As a lawyer, he knew exactly what to do. "Changing ownership like that is illegal," he said, his expression grim. "We'll take action immediately." My sorrow had turned to anger, fueling my determination. The next day, we confronted Daniel and his parents at the mansion. "Where were you yesterday?" "A maid can't just disappear like that," Daniel's mother snapped as soon as she saw me. "Maid? Who are you talking about?" I replied coolly. "Who else but you, the wife?" she retorted, completely unaware of what was coming. "Actually, we're already divorced," I said calmly, watching the shock spread across Daniel's face. My uncle stepped forward, his voice firm. "We have some legal matters to discuss." Daniel's bravado crumbled as my uncle explained that the house legally belonged to me, and that their attempt to change the ownership was a crime. Daniel's parents tried to argue, claiming they had done everything legally, but my uncle was ready. "Could you give me the name of the lawyer? This could be a case of document forgery," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Daniel was silent, his confidence shattered. "What are you doing?" he finally sputtered, turning on me in desperation. "I'm doing what you forced me to do," I replied coldly. "You're the one who started this." With nothing left to say, Daniel hung his head, his parents too stunned to speak. My uncle's cold gaze silenced any further protest. "Leave this house immediately and prepare for what's to come," he warned them. Later, my uncle revealed that my mother had anticipated something like this might happen. She had left a will, ensuring that all her assets, including the mansion, would be protected. The will was clear. Everything was to be left to me. When Daniel heard this, his demeanor changed instantly. "Please, Gina," he begged, his earlier arrogance gone. "I've already sold our house and my parents' house. I have nowhere to go." "Why would you do that?" I asked, shocked by his recklessness. It turned out that Daniel had been hiding a mountain of debt from me. He had been living a double life, spending lavishly while I worked tirelessly to support us. To pay off his debts, he had sold everything, gambling on the inheritance that he thought would be his. "That's your problem," I replied, my voice flat. "You have two options: either face charges for forgery or buy the mansion for $3 million. "That's impossible," he cried, knowing full well that he couldn't afford it. With nowhere left to turn, Daniel and his parents were forced to leave the mansion. I filed a police report against them for the fraudulent transfer of ownership, and they soon found themselves drowning in legal troubles. They had also stolen items from the mansion, precious mementos of my mother, and sold them without my knowledge. This only added to their list of crimes. Daniel's father even stormed into my office one day, demanding that I withdraw the police report. His outburst only landed him in more trouble, and he was eventually taken away by the police. The lawyer who had helped them, Daniel's cousin, lost his license due to his involvement in the forgery. The fallout from their actions left them isolated and in debt, with no one willing to help them. With the house no longer feeling like a sanctuary, I decided to sell it. The mansion, once a symbol of my mother's love, had been tainted by Daniel's family. Fortunately, a kind elderly couple expressed interest in buying it, and I knew it would be in good hands. I moved into a condo close to the company, ready to start a new chapter in my life. One day, as I was leaving the office, I ran into James, the lawyer who had helped me with the legal battle. We had grown close during the ordeal, and his presence had been a comforting constant in my life. "Would you like to have some coffee together?" he asked, smiling warmly. "Of course," I replied, feeling a flutter in my chest. Over coffee, James confessed that he had developed feelings for me. "I know you've been through a lot, and I don't want to rush you, but I'm serious about this, Gina." His sincerity touched me, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to consider the possibility of a new relationship. "Let's take things slow," I said, smiling back at him. "But I think I'd like that." Later, Daniel's parents tried to break into the mansion, mistakenly thinking I was still living there. However, the new owners quickly called the police, and they were caught. Daniel, on the other hand, managed to escape. But with no money and no prospects, he soon found himself in desperate straits. One day he called me, begging for help. "Please, Gina, we were once married," he pleaded. "Can't you help me?" I listened to his voice, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, just a sense of finality. "It's over, Daniel. I've moved on," I said, my voice firm. "Goodbye." I blocked his number and turned away, leaving the past where it belonged. Everything was finally behind me. James and I grew closer, and eventually, we became engaged. My uncle was thrilled, telling me that James was a good man who would take care of me. Despite my struggles with infertility, James was understanding and supportive. "Having you is what matters to me, Gina," he said, his eyes full of love. We decided to adopt a child, and my uncle welcomed the new addition to our family with open arms. "This child is truly my grandchild," he said, his voice filled with warmth. As I held my child, I felt a deep sense of peace. Life had not been easy, but I had survived. I had learned from my mother's strength, my uncle's wisdom, and James's love. Together, we would face whatever challenges life threw at us, building a future filled with hope and happiness. And as I looked into the eyes of my child, I knew that I would pass on all the lessons I had learned, the importance of resilience, the power of love, and the value of family.